the zoo. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo where he belongs. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. He needs to get out of Somerville and leave us fine folk alone. He don't like this, he don't like that. He's never satisfied, and that's a fact. The more we give, the more he takes. The more we fix, the more he breaks. The whole town's in an awful mess with a whole lot of civil unrest. I got one thing to suggest: he ought to leave and get gone. Find that chimp and send him home. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo where he belongs. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. He needs to get out of Somerville and leave us fine folk alone. He wants his way, it ain't no doubt. He just keeps pushing, he never stops. If he don't like how things are done, he ought to go back to where he comes from. So Cajuns, I'm asking you to buy a bowl or two, and here's what you need to do: help him pack and be kind. Make sure we don't leave that monkey behind. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. He needs to get out of Somerville and leave us fine folk alone. Life in Somerville would be so great without Albert here to demonstrate about this and that, and you and me, and getting stuff free. We ought to send Albert back to the zoo. He needs to get out of Somerville and leave us fine folk alone. Send Albert back to the zoo. He needs to get out of Somerville and leave us fine